Hello and welcome once again to the Fair Game podcast, We Love You Football. I'm Graham Miller, and in this episode, we're looking ahead to an important moment in the football calendar, the upcoming all-party parliamentary group event marking Black History Month. Now, this isn't just another meeting, it's a spotlight on the exclusions and injustices that persist off the pitch. We'll be looking into the underrepresentation of black professionals in senior roles, the barriers that blocks pathways to leadership, and highlighting the scale of the problem. To tell us all about it, on the panel we have Monique Choudhuri, Managing Director of Versify Consulting, which specialises in inclusive leadership, and she's a former non-executive director of Brentford Football Club. Delroy Corinaldi, co-founder of the Black Footballers Partnership, a tireless advocate for fairness and representation. Brian Deane, who helped launch the V11 campaign this year, pushing for legal reforms to help ex-players from financial fallout. He's also co-founder of PSMG, which works to protect future generations of players. And oh yes, he scored the very first Premier League goal for Sheffield United. Happy days indeed. And Niall Cooper, CEO of Fair Game, here to share why these issues are central to the Fair Game mission and why football must do better. But before we start our conversation, let's hear from Niall, who can bring us up to date with what's going on in the Fair Game football world.
Thanks, Graham. So there's been quite a bit going on in the world of Fair Game since we last spoke. The big thing, obviously, was the launch of the Fair Game Index, which rated 164 clubs across 22,000 data points. And our conclusion was that only 4 of the clubs that are going to be regulated are actually ready for the regulator. You can find out a whole lot more about all of that on our website, but that was a huge bit of work, and a massive thanks must go to the whole research team led by Steve Radley. On the engagement side, we're delighted to announce that we have 2 new Fair Game clubs, Torquay United and Canterbury City, and we're in conversations with 3 more as well. So hopefully some more news on that front in the next couple of weeks. So that's all been really good. In terms of political engagement, we're now working with the APPG on football in Parliament under the fantastic chairmanship of Clive Betts, and we will be having our first event on the 21st of October, which of course connects hugely with today's podcast as a bit of a preview for that event. In terms of the regulator, we are having our regular conversations now with the regulator, and we have just this week submitted our consultation document on the new owners and directors test, which hopefully we'll be able to get up on their website so you can have a proper read of that in the next couple of days. Other than that, it's time to make sure you have that penciled in your diary for the Fair Game Conference next year on the 24th and 25th of March. It's going to take place at the National Football Museum in Manchester. Should be a great event. We're already engaging with lots of our key stakeholders, and we can confirm that David Conn, the acclaimed journalist, will be one of the keynote speakers. And being that it's based in Manchester, we expect to have quite a lot of Manchester involvement, but more on that in the next few weeks as we just get that all confirmed. If you want to know more about the Fair Game Conference, do of course get in contact with myself or the team, and we can tell you a whole lot more and get engaged with that. But now, back to the pod.
So Monique, let's start with you. Versify Consulting. Tell us what it does and how it addresses the exclusions and the injustices that I mentioned in the introduction.
So Versify Consulting is as it says in the name, a consultancy that specialises in leadership, people, performance and culture, where inclusion is the golden thread that links all of these things. And specifically, our job is to work with people who perhaps wouldn't be able to advocate for themselves and help them to understand how they can be included. Also, it's to work with people who talk about inclusion, perhaps do it as a tick box. And so we actually help them understand what inclusion really means. How do you create a culture where people feel like they're welcome despite their differences and their uniqueness? And so in doing that, we would do everything from corporate work with sports organisations. But we're looking at really that sort of intersection point of inclusion. So that's taking really people that don't know much about it, giving them more information to do something about it and be good allies and advocates in their workspaces.
Tell us something about it. Just how bad is the situation, would you say?
I think that we've gone up and we've gone down in equal measure. I don't think it's helped with the wider, more global political situation where people have started turning their backs on all the good work people have done in D&I initiatives. I do think that in the UK and organisations I work with have doubled down. For instance, I work with Women in Football and I'm a board director with them, and we've just appointed an EEDI advisory group, and that's specifically to sort of take some of the challenges we see in the wider world and see what we can do to challenge those. And I still think people are tokenistic in what they do. They have an expectation that, if they put a person of colour, in a group, that they have representation by all the different people, that they're doing the job, but that's not the job. Because once you've got those people, you've got to make sure that you actually welcome them and that you are using their talents and their knowledge and their lived skills to be able to really make changes. I think that discrimination in sport is on the up. And I do not think that we have perhaps moved the dial as much in that area as perhaps we would do in some of the corporate examples that I work with. And often sport is a bit behind. So while we're well represented on the pitch and in the field of play, we're not so well represented behind the scenes in the people that run those businesses. And so people think that they're one and done. And you need much more representation across the board, but also you need to have difficult conversations. And discrimination is subtle and it's overt at the same time. And I think people don't really realise they're being discriminatory, and they just make throwaway comments, throwaway casual comments. But it needs more than education. It needs an awakening, and I think that's what we need to work on in order to really make the difference.
Delroy, you set up the Black Footballers Partnership. Do you agree with Monique that discrimination is on the up?
It's certainly not going down. I mean, I can definitely tell you that. I think where we sat when we formed Black Footballers Partnership, it was during COVID period when everyone's at home thinking about their lives. Black Lives Matter has happened. And the Black Footballers were on a WhatsApp group chatting amongst themselves and thinking, well, hang on, we're giving so much to our country and to our clubs and to our community, but we're not gaining any opportunities off the pitch. And I was unable to travel, and I was developing this strategy around, well, when can people that look like me, who are qualified and able, get opportunities off the pitch? So the players and I came together, and I got on board a whole load of academics and lawyers and all other professions and said, right, okay, what can we do to help the game move forward? Not to hold it back, but to help the game move forward. And logistically, to me, in other professions I've worked in, including financial services, in the charity world, in the consultancy world, in the wider corporate world, you bring some data along and then they go, gosh, we've got to look at this data, interrogate the data and see how we can grow the game. Sorry, in football, it has amazed me. We've got the data which shows that the Black players in the men's game, there's more work to be done in the women's game, but in the men's game, 43% of the players on the pitch are Black. And yet they only get 4% of those roles that go to former players. They get fired more often than their peers when they go into management roles, even though their performance is at least as good as their white peers. In fact, they're 41% more likely to get fired. So every time we looked at the data, we thought, okay, here you are, game. You want to improve on the pitch. The numbers tell us when you get more Black players on the pitch, the game does better. 16% of the players in 1992 were Black when the Premier League formed, then 32% 20 years later, and now it's 43%. So on the pitch, merit, doing it. And yet, even though the data says the Black player, when they become coaches and managers, do at least as well, if not better than their peers, they're not getting those jobs. So in answer to your question, is it getting Worse, well, yes, because there's more transparency. At least we're providing it. The game's not necessarily doing as much as it could, but we're providing it. And even when it gets the data which says your results will improve if you employ these people, we have empirical data that tells you that in football, the numbers don't go up, and in fact, they're more likely to get fired.
So does the data suggest that this discrimination is deliberate or perhaps subliminal? What do you think?
Well, it's systemic, that's for sure. So you've got real and deep systemic issues in football. Look, I mean, the simple fact is, to a fan, and those are the people you really want to convince, because those who own the clubs, who you ultimately have to get to and have the conversation with, can sometimes be steered by the fans. The real conversation is, look, you are going to lose a manager because that's the nature of football. You're going to lose a senior figure because that's the nature of football. Results determine what happens next. When you lose that senior person, why is it that they end up employing someone that looks and sounds like them, who they then fire after a short period of time? Can't we open up the pool like we have on the pitch to give everyone who's capable? No one wants a job handed out. Give them opportunity. Let's see how they do. And then I think you'll find they do quite well, because that's what the data tells us.
Brian, let me come to you. You've played for England. You've played for a host of clubs here and abroad. You've been a manager, a coach, even a part owner as well. Tell us about the barriers that you've come across, you've experienced, and why do you think we still have them in 2025?
Okay, so I want to start this off with a caveat by saying that as a coach, I'm not saying that I'd have been the greatest coach out there, yeah, but I took 21 years of experience from some of the best managers in the country into management, and I used that to help me through daily situations. So, you know, we talk about learned knowledge, tacit knowledge. I had a full book, yeah, and I used that, and including something that I think sometimes as a manager, empathy in the game is something that I also had to bring to the table, and I think that I performed quite well abroad. But I think because of the way how I know how the system works, I didn't come back into this country confident I was going to either get in front of anybody or I would get the time that I would need to prove how good I was as a manager. And it's very difficult to kind of, you know, I've explained some situations to people and I've said, look, and they go, really? Does that still exist? And it's like, it's so frustrating when you realize that people still aren't looking at what the real problems are. But for me personally, when I went abroad to manage, I went abroad because I thought I need to understand and I need to know whether or not I'm going to be good enough. I've got to get myself out of my own comfort zone and I've got to see if it's something that I'm willing to do. And I did it. I was relatively successful. I think I showed to everybody that, you know, certainly my management skills, my knowledge of the game was good enough to be able to, you know, steady a ship and then move on. But then when I came back, you know, I had to take a long look at myself. And some of the things happened during the time I was doing my A license and so on that really put me off the fact that you know, how long do I want to be on board with this journey? And it's funny because it eats away at your confidence. You know, if you haven't got the backing of a network, if you don't have people who want to put you into a room and believe in you, then it's going to be very difficult. You know, just on that, and I need to give him credit because he was the first person to really ignite that fire in me, was Alan Pardew when I was at West Ham. And he was, you know, I got to the end of the season, he was releasing me. And he said to me, have you ever thought about going into management? And I was like, never really, because the perception is it's not for you, right? That is how the system works. You never I never heard in the changing rooms, oh, he'd make a good manager. He comes across that way. It doesn't happen for people like me, because like we've touched on, people are already saying they want somebody in their own image, and I've seen it, you know. So when I stripped it back and I looked at it and I thought, why can't I get in the room? One of the harshest things that I had to really sort of like put to rest was the fact that, did anybody really want me being the leader of their operation and what I represent, what I look like, you know? And that might sound harsh, but I've got to the point where it doesn't really matter now. I've seen it enough times, and I've kind of made my peace with the fact that I was never going to get a chance, you know? And like I said, I caveated that at the beginning, because you need to understand that if anybody's going to be watching this, they might be thinking, well, what makes you think that you'd have been a great manager? I'm saying, no, I had 21 years playing under some of the best managers in this country. Surely that deserved to be able to get in the room and just have a conversation with somebody.
What do you think it is then about the English approach, for want of a better word? What's the difference between the English approach and what you've experienced far more positively abroad?
I just think that it's so wrapped up in networks and, you know, layering people up so that they ultimately keep control. Somebody like me is never, ever going to get the time, because it just doesn't work like that. It's so rooted in the fact that, you know, like, if you make a mistake, straight away, he's made a mistake. Anybody could see that. And I've seen it, and I've seen the time what people get. I'll give you an example of what I mean. And this is slightly different, but when I went abroad, my idea was this. I wanted to develop players from this country. So what I wanted to do is a top league in Europe. Well, when I say top league, it was a tipper league in Norway. And I wanted to see if I could loan a couple of young players, develop them under my wing, and send them back to the club with a different experience. And actually getting somebody to commit to lending me a player, no chance. But then I look at some of the other players, some of the other ex-players who go into management, and you find that clubs are falling over themselves. Whoever's making the decisions that situation, because it's somebody who they know or somebody who thinks like them. You know, I played over 700 games. I scored over 200 goals. If I couldn't pass anything on to any of those people, even as a man, right, then there's something wrong. But I knew I was never going to get the chance. And you get to a point where you think, what's the point in me thinking I'm going to sacrifice myself and my time going over the country, spending half of the time away from my family for what? And I think that what you've got is you've got a lot of black players who actually think, I'm not going to waste my time. And for me as a coach, I got to the point where I thought, I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And it was a tough decision, but it was something that all the learning that I'd had from being on my license and so on. And one of the tutors said it quite. He says, "Look, if you're out of the game for 2 years, then you're struggling to get back in." And I took that on board, and I respected it, and I respected it because it was from him, you know. And all of those experience in terms of learning your trade, doing the courses is brilliant. And I went on those courses and went that way because I thought, I can't have an opinion unless I have gone through that process and I understand it from both sides. So I've tried to give myself the best opportunity to understand what it's about so that I can have a balanced argument. But I think that that's just where the finite point for me is the fact that, does somebody want to have somebody like me at the head of their operation.
Yeah, Niall, this is pretty depressing stuff, isn't it? I mean, we call it the beautiful game, but there's a lot of work to be done. It should be so much better.
I totally agree, and that's, we at Fair Game have always put the issues around diversity quite at the centre of it, and I think it was quite important and impactful that the family review, for which Fair Games Manifesto predated by 2 months, did say diversity was a key part and needs to be across all elements, because that's how you progress the game. It needs to be embedded across how the game progresses across a whole range of things. And for me, look, I'm a white middle class male. I have white privilege. I realise that I'm in a privileged situation. I don't have first-hand experiences of a lot of things that everybody else on this pod have experienced. So for me, this is what I think is really important. I'm really glad that everybody's here on today, is listening, and actually being aware that there is so much that people like myself need to learn. From my own background, I've picked up on it. I see some of these things, but I don't live it because it's not me. I'm different. I've got a different colour skin. I find it really frustrating when I've been as a director in boardrooms and seen other clubs where some of these issues are depressingly spoken out quite loudly because they're talking to a white man and they think it's a safe space to talk in a kind of discriminatory way. And I find that really depressing. So, one of the, this is half the reason why I'm really happy that Monique's on the call, is because obviously I engaged firstly with Monique through Brentford, and really, and being in that boardroom and being a guest in that boardroom, and the experience in that boardroom is, for me, one of the few boardrooms that I've been in that you felt that there was a commitment towards trying to do things differently. And it's a very sad state of affairs, because I've been in a lot of boardrooms that I'm picking on one example. But I think for me, the experiences of Brian, of Delroy, and what Monique has experienced as a Brentford director, I think it's so important that clubs up and down the country listen and learn, and don't think that football in any way has reached some sort of golden era where it's all right, because it certainly isn't. And I think we need to really make sure that we do the best we can to tackle it totally, particularly if you're with white privilege, because otherwise we're letting loads of people down.
I want to talk to Monique in a moment about her experience in the boardroom. But before I do that, second question to you, really, Niall. The football regulator is about to come on board. Is this anything to do with him? I mean, is it in any way, shape or form part of his remit?
I think it's what's really good is it wasn't in the first iteration of the football governance bill. The second one has brought the issues about diversity into the State of the Game report and potentially the governance code. So there is going to be an opportunity for it to be put on the spotlight and to get some of that data that Delroy talks about in an even more public arena, and to get clubs having to actually think about it more seriously. So there is a potential. And I think this is where the work that Monique does with other clubs becomes even more important, because this is opportunity to try and get clubs to learn and to improve. From a fair game perspective, we're very keen that the financial flow within the game does look at rewarding clubs that do things the right way. And this would be one of those things that we think would be the right way. So I think it will fall a bit. It's up to people like myself and Delroy and Brian and Monique to try and make sure that the regulator does take this on board and does look at it and produce stuff that actually makes a difference, because there's an awful lot of opportunity for it not. I've spoken to Delroy before about the difference between, and actually Monique, I think all of you actually, about the difference between tick box and effective outcomes. And I think that's really important that we try and look at how we do that. I will not say that I am the one with all the answers to this. I am definitely not. And I think football just needs to continue listening, continue look how we can improve and how we can do things differently.
Monique, so take us into the Brentford boardroom. What changes were you able to bring into play? I mean, when you told them what you've told us already, obviously in far more detail, what was the response? What was the reaction you got?
Well, I was incredibly lucky because I had a really fantastic advocate and ally in Phil Giles, who is the sporting director of Brentford, and he is one hell of a person. I don't know how many people know him on this call, but he's quite a special individual because he's quite shy, he's quite humble. I mean, he says stuff, he's incredibly direct, but he always thinks about what is the most prevailing issue that you need to tackle and what you can tackle. And he always said, when you are on the board at Brentford, you can't tackle the football. That's my job. Leave it to me. Leave it to the experts and we'll deal with that. And then obviously, if we let you down, then you can challenge us all you like. But you need to get on with the stuff that's more important, which is having a club and a boardroom that represents society. And that only happened after, in lockdown, the sad and untimely death of George Floyd, when I, on a board meeting, which was still online at that point, I turned around and says, we've got to do better. We haven't made a statement as a club. We haven't been in solidarity with anybody. We have black people working in our club. Have we been around? And have we said, I'm sorry, how you feel? What's your experience right now? What can I do? How can I be there for you? And we've got to get better. We are in the London Borough of Hounslow, and the ONS statistics in 2020 was 53% non-white. And in our stadium, it was 7%. And they are stark figures. Yeah. And I said, what does it mean when you've got a stadium that sits in the middle of Hounslow, which has 17,500 people in it, and only 7% of them are not white? What does that mean? What are you trying to say? It means people on the outside feel totally and utterly excluded from our experience. So we've just got to do better. And, put the phone down from shut down my computer from our board meeting, and I get a call, and it was Phil Giles, to say, what do we have to do? What can we do? And I said, what we need to do is start by looking at our own. We have to start at the top. You're not going to make this better at the bottom. You can do the funnel, but everyone does the funnel. Everyone recruits diversity at the bottom, but that diversity never makes it up to the top. It never gets up to the management and the senior leadership where it needs to make the difference. You're going to make the difference, you have to start from the top. And what we need to do is change our board. And our board has got to look more like our community. And if it doesn't look more like our community, then we're doing something wrong. And that was the journey that we actually took. And so in order to do that, we really went on a journey to review our governance, to review our principles, the way we operated, and to really dig deep into the community to try to recruit people who were so different from us, who didn't know that, but could offer us a different perspective. And we did, and we managed to. And part of the end of that process, we took Deja Davis and a lady called Preeti Shetty, who some of you may know from Upshot, and it transformed the board. It had to transform the board. There were 8 of us, and you take on 2 people, and it changes. I was the only woman, and there were 7 white blokes, all over 50. Now, to actually change the thinking, you have to know, you say the word privilege, and I think it's even more than privilege. It's knowing your privilege, but actually it's to go, well, who are we representing? Who are we shoulder to shoulder with here? Who do we need to ally, support? How do we use that privilege to make it better for others? How can we do that? And the first stage of that is education. And so we went on a journey. As a board, we went on a journey to really educate ourselves, to look at the differences, to look at the data, to look at what we weren't doing. And as a result of that, we made a wholesale change. Now, here's the thing. To date, I do not know any other club that has gone through the process that we've gone through. Now, we talk about Brighton, and Brighton is a different diverse demographic than Brentford has. Brentford's in the heart of London, in a very, very diverse demographic. And Brighton has its own diversity, and they work really hard on changing what they have to change. But there aren't many clubs that are still ready to do it. And I phoned Paul Barber, who is the CEO, and I said, I'm really frustrated. I said, we've made this brilliant change at Brentford. We work really hard. We get lots of plaudit for it, but that's not what we do it for. I said, and yet we still haven't managed to make any changes at the senior leadership level across the whole of the football landscape. We're still struggling with women. We're still struggling with underrepresented, communities. I don't think there is a person of disability that sits on a board, anywhere. I think it's still only 5% diversity in the Premier League, and I think it's 9, in the EFL. And that hasn't changed. In fact, if anything, it's gone down. So whilst I applaud what an independent regulator can do, and I think we lobbied at Women in Football for diversity to be on the bill, the only way that is going to change is by mandate. There is no other way that can change, because if it's by choice, people will go always, and I think Delroy and Brian talked about it, people will always go to their networks. They'll always go to their little book and they'll go, who do we know? And you want an example of that? Look at all the managers, the football managers going around at the moment in the Premier League. One gets sacked, one goes somewhere else, one gets sacked, one goes somewhere else. There is no new blood, new fresh perspectives, nothing. There's nothing. There are so many great managers and coaches out there, and they never get to the top table. And that is a travesty that is actually happening. And I want to say that we've made changes. I want to say we've turned the dial up. And I want to say that we've made progress, but the data shows that we haven't. It shows that it's decreased. It's not gone up. So I'm probably going to be really unpopular if people watch this podcast. But actually, get out the way and let it happen. Have a look and see the talent that's around you, and build it into your thinking and your development of your organizations. Just do it. It's not on invitation, it's on inclination. People have to want to make this change, and they have to see that we've got all of this fantastic representation on the pitch. And I still don't understand in our dinosaur age why none of that amazing leadership potential that we see through coaches, grassroots, on the pitch has not showed up in our boardrooms and in our senior leadership teams. And don't confine them to just being ambassadors, because that's what happens. They put them in as ambassadors, and that's like token. It's not the same as putting someone on your board and going, they make a difference because they've got a great perspective, diverse or otherwise, on what we could be doing differently. Plus the fact they've been a player or coach and they might know something a bit about, how to do this. So I think there are some enlightened pockets out there, but there aren't enough. And I don't think it's good enough just to take them on as EDI managers in organisations like the FA. I actually think that's tokenistic as well, and I try and step out the way. If someone invites me to be on a group, I go, I'm a white middle-aged woman. What you doing putting me on there? They go, well, you know stuff. I go, yeah, I know stuff, but you really want to give that opportunity to me. But then I think if you give it to someone else, you're doing the tokenistic thing. You're giving it to the person that is white, is not white, is diverse in order to do the job. And you shouldn't just only have those people being EDI. You should have allies and advocates absolutely everywhere. So I want to say that we are moving forward. I want to say that there is an uptick, and I don't mean from tick box. I mean there is an uptick in looking at that fabulous talent that we have on the pitch and bringing it in to help make decisions. But you tell me where they are.
Delroy, Monique has outlined a sort of workable blueprint there. What are the first changes you would like to see, and what kind of time frame do you think we need to make these changes?
I think the time frame goes back to Monique's point, which is how committed is the game to change? If they're very committed to change, you can actually do it very quickly, right? And that, again, the data tells us that actually you're not when you do the statistical analysis, you're not actually employing the best people for the job. So that should automatically make the guy, and it often is a guy, doing the numbers go, hang on, we need to do this straight away, because it's not just about visibility and all of those sorts of things. It's actually about performance. They would not have so many black players on the pitch if they did not perform. And those black players that are on the pitch, they know if they're not performing, they're gone. So they've actually been brought up in corporate America, corporate Britain. If you're not good enough, you're out the door. That's what they're used to. And the fact that talent like Brian, he's saying, I'm not even going to apply because actually they've not seen me as leaders, tells us the problem's not the players. It's not even the fans, actually, but we need to get the fans on board. It's those who are doing the hiring and the firing. They're just narrow in terms of their perception. And can I just say this, though, about the players? And I feel for the players because a lot of them, and Monique will know this, and Brian's been one of them, they've been in the game since the age of, I mean, it used to be a lot later, but now it's like 8, 9, 10, right? Very, very early. So their worldview is around, I need to get on the pitch in order to play, in order to become a talent in the Premier League. And you know what? It's a magnificent achievement. You know, it's almost like winning a lottery ticket, being a Premier League player, right? And I spoke to a Premier League player who's exceptionally well known, who's achieved a lot in the game, got trophies. And I remember speaking to him about a few years ago. I won't tell you when, because then you'll be able to guess who it is. Oh no, it's going to be different for my generation of player. We've got the qualifications, we've got the skill, we've got the talent, we've learned from the last lot. I talk to him now, and I tell you, confidence, Brian, you mentioned it, absolutely. Confidence is shot because they're just taking around like little puppets to be entertainers, never the leaders. And they have to smile and grin, almost like an ambassador for the game. And then they're dispatched off for most of the week. And then maybe next week or a month later, Black History Month, they're suddenly dragged out and they're told, right, perform, entertainer. You'll never be a leader, but perform. And they have to, because the thing with footballers is they retire twice. They get to the age of, let's say, if they're very lucky, 34, 35. And for those people that are listening, you're thinking, well, they've got loads of money. Get to the age of 34, 35, and let's give them $500,000. Here you are, $500,000 a week. But as soon as they retire, the income drops, often 20, 30 to 20 or 30 grand. Not down to 20 or 30 grand, to 20 or 30 grand. But they've been educated since the age of 8 to carry on this lifestyle. So they keep buying these flash cars, they keep doing X, Y, and Z, and that is an education. But remember, they're surrounded by the system, the agents, the family members, the lawyer, the accountants. Not saying they're all bad people, but they all are getting paid. And then they drop the player, who then may have marital issues, may have gambling issues and so on. And before you know it, the income's more or less disappeared. Whilst for many of their white peers who've been able to stay in the system, their retirement, they don't retire until they're 50 or 60, right? So the black player's career ends at a very early stage. They don't stand the chance of getting back in according to our numbers. They're 41% more likely to get fired when they're in a job, even though they're performing as well. So therefore, the game is creating this terrible vicious circle of, dear Brian, we loved you, you scored that great goal, and you're going to live off that great goal until you pass. Hopefully not for many years, Brian, right? You'll be around for a lot longer. And they get maybe 100 or 200 pounds, maybe slightly more to tell that story. But that's not enough to make you live. They want to tell the story of, I coached these kids, then I got into I coached in the first team, then I became the coach and the manager. And I'll say this to you, the game has a lot to learn. It's doing brilliantly well, look. Premier League, soft power, fantastic. Money coming into the country, we love it. We all have our teams, great. But I mean, in other two sports that are comparable, American sports, the NFL and the NBA. Look, the NFL has had its issues, but last year they were employing black coaches, right? And in the NBA, I think it's like near 50% of the coaches are black, right? 51% of the assistant managers. So there is an example of other leagues that have had difficulties and now pulling through the talent, right? This is not about handing someone a favor. None of those in any of those groups want the favor, because in football, you get found out. They just want that opportunity to show their talents. And the fact they're not giving them that opportunity points to more about the attitudes of those with the levers in the game, who are not Phil Giles, who are other people who have the power to bring people through. But when they look around the table, they're more inclined to hire their mates than on meritocratic principles. And that's the real challenge we've got. So I love the fact that we're doing this in Black History Month. It's great. But these guys, and it is at the moment mainly guys we've done the data on, ladies too, they're performing week in, week out, October, November, January, February, throughout the year, right? And then they get this 1 month where suddenly those that the game pays for, those organizations will come out and say something. The FA will say, oh, it's really terrible. And then they will run back into their little tunnel come the end of October, November until next year. This is something that the independent football regulator needs to look at. constant conversation with politicians as we do. And in other areas where I work on boards or I'm on boards and so on, I keep telling them data first, build that clarity about what your issue is, then build that credibility by talking about accountability, transparency, and so on, and then build the collaboration in order to get there. This game has funded institutions around this space that are all about marketing, as far as I can tell, not about the systemic issues. And we need some of that knowledge that Monique has, and the knowledge that the players have, to really start tackling some of the systemic issues, because it's not about doing down the game. None of those players ever want to do down the game. It's about growing the game and growing what it can do in our respective communities. And we know at the moment, our communities, some of them are divided and broken. And actually the game can be used to bring people together. That's what we're about.
Brian, do you think this up and coming parliamentary group event, do you feel that might make a difference? Or, from what I've been hearing, it's just another talking shop. What do you think?
I've got to agree. I think that it's, like you say, with a lot of these things, they get dusted off, brought out, and unfortunately, it is like a tick box for a lot of people. You have companies that will help to mold the narrative and show how it is to react to certain situations, and then they can put it away again. So I went abroad as a manager thinking, and this is exactly how it was for me. I thought, you know what, I'm going to do my badges quietly. I'm going to get out before anybody realizes what my modus operandi is. I'm not going to go shouting everybody I want to be a manager, because we've seen how that works out for people when it becomes a debate on Twitter or on the radio or whatever about this certain subject. What I did was I thought, I'm going to do it quietly. I'm going to apply quietly, go do my job. And then once I'm in situ, I'll be judged on my results. Yeah. Because if you're waiting for people to wait to get what people think of you as a manager, then a lot of the time, you're not going to like what you hear, because they're not looking at you as a coach a lot of the time. They're looking at what they see, and they're thinking, like, I'll come back to you again. Is this the person? Is this the face of the operation? Is this the face of our ship, if you get what I mean? Is this the captain of our ship? And it was a harsh lesson for me. How do we get into, how do we promote people who have all these experiences? How do we educate people to make it in law, or as an option or an alternative? I don't know, but I know that I think, Monique, you said it earlier about a lot of people in these positions find it very hard to let go of that power, and that's another issue. You can't tell somebody, look, you need to do some forward planning, and you need to look at the kind of people who will be right for this role, because no one wants to see themselves out of that role because of everything that it brings to them. When I manage, and I can only talk about myself, but you know what? One of the greatest things for me was, as a manager, was that I oversaw 3 guys who went on to play for their national team. And one of them named his child after me. The other one still calls me boss, even though I've not had much. But those are the kind of things that I see that you are responsible for as a coach or a manager. You're bringing men on. You're actually teaching people to have responsibility and maturity, because you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't know how to handle those situations, then you will fail. So actually managing and coaching is not just about developing a player. It's about developing the man or the woman. It's about being happy having somebody who has all that experience in the boardroom without feeling threatened that they're going to undermine your knowledge, and experience. You know, that is another issue. You know, and you've got to be brave enough. I think some of these people have got to be brave enough to say, look, what can we learn from this person, having him on board? How do we change our demeanor? How do we become more culturally diverse and understand what it's like to be that person walking in those shoes? You know, and until you understand that and you can take that perspective, you're going to have a very narrow view of how things should be done.
Got time. We're coming to the end, Niall, of our conversation. Looking ahead to this parliamentary group meeting, do you see this as a potential opportunity for change or not? I mean, from what we've been hearing, it's pretty essential that we must make changes.
I mean, I think so totally. I mean, from a fair game perspective, you know, our direction of travel now is to deliver a fairer future for football. To do that, there are voices that need to be heard, and they need to be heard at the highest level. Whether the all-party parliamentary group can deliver tomorrow, it's unlikely. But if we can get those voices in the room and being heard, and that makes people aware that there are significant issues that need to be addressed, and that is a step forward. From our perspective at Fair Game, the three people on the call are people that Fair Game wants to be working with going forward, because we want to learn and we want to look at how we can help empower and make those changes actually happen that need to happen. We're not going to say that right now we've got the solution to how it does happen, but what we want to do is empower everybody to make sure that we can go in that same direction and that we can look at a way that we change the way football has been going and make it better, because the stories and the voices that we've heard today tell you that football needs to improve and that we do need a fairer future. And that's what Fair Game's mission is 100% about. And hopefully the all-party parliamentary group can be a step, and it's one step, in the direction that starts turning that tanker and making it a better place. And that when Delroy or Brian look at where we are in 10, 15 years' time, they can see that there has been improvement, because right now there definitely needs to be.
Okay, Monique, Delroy, Brian and Niall, thank you so much for your time. If you've enjoyed it, do please subscribe to the Fair Game podcast. You can find it on all the usual channels. I'm Graham Miller. The producer is Ian Beach. Thank you for listening. And until the next edition of We Love You Football, it's goodbye for now.